stories of the day. The latest developments in Ukraine. Talks in Berlin may have opened the way for the Russian convoy to enter eastern Ukraine. Moscow maintains it's a humanitarian aid convoy. Kiev still suspects it may somehow be a way of getting arms to the rebels.
Some 300 Russian trucks have been stationed along the border with Ukraine for days now. They've been waiting for the green light from Kiev to cross, and it could come soon. The Russian foreign minister has announced that talks with his Ukrainian counterpart had helped resolve some issues.
An agreement has been reached with the Ukrainian side, as well as with the International Committee of the Red Cross. So we expect our humanitarian aid to be delivered to those who need it. However, we are not able to report on positive results about reaching a ceasefire in the first place and about the political process.
Moscow says the convoy will bring humanitarian aid to areas where pro-Russian separatists are battling with the army. But Kiev suspects the Russians of seeking to arm militiamen who are struggling to maintain their positions in the face of the offensive carried out by Ukrainian troops. On Sunday, Berlin hosted talks attended by the Russian, Ukrainian, French and German foreign ministers. Some progress was made regarding border control, but the negotiations were described as difficult.
If we do not pay close attention to the situation, then we are going to drift towards a direct confrontation between Russian and Ukrainian forces.
Russian armed forces have been deployed along the Ukrainian border and look set to stay. Moscow puts forward its right to defend itself in the case of an attack. The West and Kiev, on the other hand, fear the Russians could stage a military intervention to support the separatists.
Clovis Casali there. We have Armin Georgian, our international affairs editor, here in the studio. Armin, the big burning question for many days now, what should we make of this Russian convoy? And do you think that there is something in this fear that Kiev and many Western countries have, that this is somehow a Trojan horse situation, a way of getting arms, even troops, into eastern Ukraine?
Well, Putin's allies are certainly in trouble, so he's got to do something about it. This aid convoy would require a ceasefire between the separatists and the Ukrainian army. So that is what Foreign Minister Lavrov was talking about just now in Clovis Casali's report. That's the real sticking point, is the ceasefire that would be needed to get this aid convoy in. Now, what does a ceasefire achieve? Obviously, it allows the rebels to have some breathing space, to regroup, and maybe even to get some advice from the personnel of the Russian aid convoy, because some of those personnel have identified themselves as veterans of the Russian military. That doesn't mean to say that this aid convoy is carrying weapons as such, but clearly some of this whole Russian aid operation does have some military features. So not surprisingly, Kiev is very skeptical about the real intentions here. Also, there's an important propaganda aspect to all this, which is that, both sides are trying to show that they care more than the other side about civilians. We've seen that propaganda war escalating today with accusations flying to and forth about who was responsible for the deaths of civilians in an incident today. So this is a very important propaganda tool as well, this aid convoy, about who's targeting civilians and who isn't. So all in all, Mark, there are many reasons why Kiev doesn't really want to see this aid convoy deployed on its territory, I think.
Ukraine says it's closing in on pro-Russian rebels in Donetsk and Lugansk. Does this signal a real breakthrough for them?
Kiev's tactic, I think, Mark, is encirclement and slow strangulation, and that worked for Sloviansk, which had been the symbolic center of the pro-Russian insurgency. That city fell to the Ukrainian forces in early July. It's too early to say whether that tactic has worked in Donetsk and Luhansk yet. But let's situate these two cities on the map for you. Obviously, both very important, indeed strategically crucial for both sides in this conflict, because they're major population centers, particularly Donetsk, which had 1 million people living there until this crisis. Now, of course, fewer because of the refugees that have fled. But so far, the Ukrainians are on the outskirts of Donetsk, and they've taken, or reported taking, one neighborhood in Lugansk. So it's still in the balance, I think, Mark. And the wild card, as we've been saying before, is what is Russia going to do? Is it willing to stage a Crimean-style intervention if push comes to shove or not? So far, the Ukrainian army is sending a very strong signal that it's not going to accept that Crimean scenario. Because remember, a few days ago, the Ukrainian army fired on a convoy of Russian armored vehicles, which the Ukrainians said had crossed from Russia into Ukraine. So that's certainly trying to dissuade Russia from an overt intervention. But of course, a covert war has been going on for months between the two sides anyway.
On the diplomatic front, Armin, any glimmer of hope in the light of yesterday's meeting of foreign ministers that took place in Berlin?
Well, I think they were trying to put a spin on it, weren't they? As we heard in those soundbites from Sergei Lavrov and the German foreign minister, they may have made some small progress, but as I said, no progress on the really meaty issues of a ceasefire or a political solution for eastern Ukraine. It's noticeable to me that there's much less talk now than there was 2 months ago of those reforms that are supposed to happen, the decentralization, political reforms in eastern Ukraine, which are meant to ease this crisis and create a long-term peace. And one gets the impression, really, Mark, with the international diplomacy on Ukraine, that it responds to every military escalation with Europe and the US trying to pull both sides back from the brink, but it's not really bringing that political solution any closer, as far as I can see. And the diplomatic process has indeed been very much stuck since that short-lived Geneva Accord of mid-April. Since then, we've seen ad hoc meetings like this one we're seeing pictures of in Berlin, but really no appetite for regular high-level multilateral diplomatic summits.
Armin, thank you very much indeed. One can't help but think of the people in Donetsk, whoever side you're on, those people suffering and living in appalling circumstances, dangerous circumstances right now. Armin Georgian, thank you very much indeed. Armin Georgian, our international affairs editor. We take a short break. After that, we return with more news. Stay with us, live from Paris.